We're at TEDx. All right, so I am here standing in front of everybody right now, about to give a talk on authenticity and tradition and the dilemmas that those two words bring. Now, you may think I'm a social scientist or a moral philosopher. It's definitely a hard no on either one. I'm a chef. I've been cooking for well over 20 years now. It's a long time. And in those years, I've seen a lot of crazy things happen. I've had pots and pans thrown at me. I've seen lovers' quarrels involving knives, which is a little nutty. I've even cooked for the mafia, which I found out later. That was here in Chicago. Now, I've managed to keep a fairly even temperament throughout this entire time. My temperament was pretty chill. But every once in a while, there's a moment that happens. And it always happens during the busiest times at the restaurant, right when we're in the middle of the rush, everything's going crazy. An individual will feel compelled to walk up to me while I'm working and tell me, your food is not authentic. It's not traditional. It's actually doing a disservice to the Filipino community. Great. That is the one thing that really manages to really just piss me off. Why? It's because these frustrating individuals and their weird rhetoric, it's repeated online, on reviews, no matter how many accolades or how much recognition we receive, and it's exhausting. You get tired of it. Now, I guess in order for us to understand the applications of authentic and traditional to food and cuisine, we have to understand the definitions, right? So authentic in its simplest form is something that's made or done in the same way as the original. Now, in this case, our lovely friend, they often reference dishes or restaurants that they used to go to. Oh, it's not like my mom's, it's not like my aunt's. Of course it's not, because that's your original. That's what you grew up with, right? Now, traditional, by definition, is something that is derived from tradition, something that's passed on from ancestor to descendant by word of mouth or action alone, right? Recipes, family recipes get passed on. The ceremony around how we serve food, like serving turkey on Thanksgiving, or arroz caldo in my case, during Christmas. Now, it's these two words that form this belief system that these individuals have, that then form absolutes and an unwavering ideology that what they grew up with, what they know, is the absolute truth of what a cuisine, a dish, or food should be. So let's bring it back a little bit. My origin blurs the lines of culture and tradition a little bit, and food. So follow along. I was born in the Philippines. I moved to Canada when I was a wee little baby. And then I moved to Detroit. That's where I spent most of my childhood. Then back to the Philippines when I was 11 for high school and college, and then Detroit to where I started my professional career. And then that brought me to New York, Chicago, and then eventually Portland, Oregon, where my restaurant is now. Pepper in a couple stints in Europe, and, I get around. It's pretty good, right? Now, a lot of my happy memories growing up was sharing food and learning how to cook from my family, of course, and friends, neighbors. One of those particular memories that stands out is actually I learned how to make pierogies from an immigrant Polish family back in the day. So where I grew up in Detroit, it's predominantly a Polish community. Now, the physical action and the food alone broke down any spoken language barrier that there was. So a question comes to mind. The pierogies that I learned how to make using their techniques that they passed on from family member to family member, generation to generation, and the ingredients that they used that they grew up with or that they had, are they then inauthentic because I'm not Polish? That's an answer for a later talk, but it really brings gets you thinking a little bit. I'm just gonna stick to Filipino food. It's easier that way, right? So Filipino food is this point of pride for a lot of people, and they take it in. They're proud of the food and the culture. So I understand their need to defend it. But oftentimes they don't go past the dishes that they grew up with or what they're familiar with, right? They're overlooking the origins of the ingredient, the origins of that dish, and the history of the Philippines itself. So you see, the Philippines is an amazing archipelago composed of 7,614 islands, just off the top of my head, I guess, depending on the tide. And its cuisine is deeply rooted in its indigenous people. Its unique location draws a lot of influence from neighboring countries and throughout history, the colonizers that have passed through. Now, ingredients and dishes that are traditionally thought to be Filipino were actually brought through via the many trade routes that have passed through our country. Now, one of those particular trade routes, the Acapulco trade route, was established in the 1500s by our common colonizer, Spain. And that created the deepest connection with Mexico. Not a lot of people know that. So ingredients like cilantro, lime, techniques to making tequila and mezcal came from the Philippines, and vice versa, right? Philippines wouldn't have pastries, wouldn't have chocolate or wheat, even dishes that are named after traditional Mexican cooking techniques. They wouldn't be there. So you see, cuisine, much like culture and people, adapt and evolve. Those dividing lines of origin then over time become blurred and eventually accepted and adapted as our own. What is authentic and traditional to an individual is heavily influenced by their personal history and their environment, right? So in the case of many immigrants and immigrant families, oftentimes they want to recreate dishes that they grew up with because they're in foreign lands now. But the ingredients that they're looking for might not readily be available. So they have to adapt and utilize ingredients that are local to their environment in that place and time, and creating a dish that is as close to the familiar as possible, but with distinct differences. Now, in this particular case, let's use a great example. One of my favorite dishes in the Philippines is called Sinigang. It's this sour broth. It utilizes a green fruit, such as tamarind, guava, kamyas, sometimes citrus, as in like lime or calamansi, to kind of get that tart flavor. Now, those ingredients were not readily available back in the day, especially fresh. So I've seen recipes adapted utilizing green apples, rhubarb, salmon berries to do the same exact thing, right? Utilizing it to get that tart flavor out. Now, another question. If what you grew up with was a sinigang made with green apples or rhubarb, when does that become your authentic? Is it your authentic, right? Now, as a chef, it's my passion to cook and feed people. I love it. Makes you feel alive, right? So for those unfamiliar with the cuisine, what I try to do is I try to create this lasting impression of our flavors and our hospitality. It's to help elevate our cuisine to become a common answer to the relationship-straining question, what do you want to eat tonight? Now, for those familiar with the cuisine, I want them to connect their positive food memories and my authentic expression of the shared love for Filipino food and culture. So the way that I approach dishes at the restaurant is pretty simple. It's steeped in authenticity and breaks the norms of tradition. So when I'm conceptualizing dishes, I kind of surround them around specific flavor profiles or a standout memory of what that dish is. So after that dish is tasted and tested, it has to meet three real fundamental requirements for me. So number one, visual impact. When you go to a restaurant, you sit down, a plate of food is placed in front of you, you're instantly forming an opinion about that dish and how it's supposed to taste or how it's gonna taste. We call that in the industry eating with your eyes, right? So in this case, pancit bihon is this awesome noodle dish from the Philippines. It's made with rice noodles, a lot of awesome ingredients, really delicious. Now, to the untrained eye, pancit bihon may not be as appealing to most people. So what we try to do at the restaurant is we frame it in something beautiful, like copper pan, handmade ceramic plates. Maybe we'll add pops of colors like edible flowers or microgreens to really just, we call it zhuzhing, to zhuzh it up. But it won't change the dish fundamentally. That leads us into our second requirement. Number 2 is flavor. Flavor for me is a key component into entering this different realm. It's a trigger, right? So as soon as I take a bite of that pancit, it should trigger this physical response that then triggers a memory of, oh, it's kind of like my mom's, or it's similar to my aunt's, right? And as a chef, that's the most exciting part for me, is seeing the oohs and ahs on the faces of people when they eat our food. Now, number 3 is actually the most important. It's one that I think everybody might be able to relate to. It's the emotional response. You see, that simple plate of noodles is the focus for a really core memory of mine. I used to work late. I would get off of work at 2 a.m., get home, and on the table, there's a plate of food, usually pancit or adobo, depending on who was cooking. And I would put them in the microwave, and for that minute or two that it takes the heat up, I would hear footsteps come down the stairs. And it would either be my mom or my dad. And they would join me in a meal, sit down with me. That's love. That's true love through food. Just, give me a minute. I'm sorry, hold on. Sorry, my dad passed away from cancer in 2009, so it still hurts a little. All right. Man, he'd be making fun of me right now. All right. So this is how I manage to stay true to my authentic self. By feeding people and serving dishes that really is authentic to who I am, right? The flavors, the memories. I break away from tradition in the techniques that I utilize. By cooking, plating, these are techniques I've learned over the years. And in doing so, I realized that there are so many different ways to approach one thing and to achieve the same goal. Now, cooking and food for me is part of this amazing universal language, one that tethers us to culture and tradition. I'm in the business of feeding people. I am passionate about sharing hospitality, about happiness, satisfaction through your belly. And in doing so, I realize that I don't have to be from any particular place or tied to any set of ingredients to be authentic, right? It's not about that. It's about connection with everybody through what we see, what we taste, and how we feel. It's really, really important stuff. It doesn't matter what we do. Could be cooking, that's what I do. Could be quantum physics. I can't do that. It could be painting, could be writing, could be so many different things. But for me, as a humble cook, at the end of the day, that's what I do. I just cook for a living. I love it. There is no better guide in the quest for understanding the evolution of tradition and authenticity than through food. Thank you.